Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Is Process Mapping a Barrier to Innovation? Presented by Craig Clair, Vice President and Principal Analyst at Forrester Research. Go ahead, Craig.
Well, thank you very much. And we're going to talk about new approaches to transforming processes. So I'm going to get right into it. We have a lot of content here. It's a very interesting subject of active research at Forrester, and it really stems from this major transition in the tech management industry, really in the way business and the way customers and people really are starting to interact with the world. We call it the age of the customer, and what you're seeing here is really a trend line that goes back to the beginning of the last century in 1900, where really, in the age of manufacturing and age of distribution, there was a certain dominance that companies achieved based on really scale, based on having a tremendous brand, based on having the most efficient distribution system. Around 1990, we started to see that while that was still very, very important, you had new companies like Amazon and Google, the sort of poster children of the tech bubble, come in and really lead with information first, connected PCs and supply chains, really leveraging information to really drive value in business. And around 2010, we started to see a couple of major forces come into play, one being social media and one being mobility. And these have really given customers a new power. Think of the way that your parents might have bought a car. They went to the local dealership, which had 90% of the information about the car. They kind of told you what the price was. You really didn't have a lot of access. Sure, you had friends you could talk to and so forth, but really they controlled the information. But today, that control of information has shifted to the customer. The average car buyer now spends 11 hours online researching before they even go into a dealership. So this new power, the social media and mobility, has really led to a shift, and we are calling that shift the age of the customer. And really that underpins all that we're going to discuss today. Now, if you look at this pyramid, and I'll just build this out, a lot of the work that we've done traditionally has been sort of out of that age of the manufacturing and distribution world. It's been very production-oriented. People kind of, doing very task-based work and really focusing on getting a transaction done. And what's happened in the last 5, 7, 10 years is that we've either outsourced a lot of those shorter-term tasks that didn't require a lot of knowledge, and mostly we've automated them. You notice that corporate profits just keep continuing to accelerate at the same time that jobs, while they're coming back now out of the Great Recession, you never quite come back to the employment levels of the previous decline in business. Well, that's because of this automation that's occurring. So we've moved a lot of work to the base of this pyramid in the production area there. So more and more where companies are adding value is at the top of the pyramid. It's in exceptions that are complicated. I've had interviews with major executives running giant call centers for, say, telecommunications, and about 70% of their calls, of their inquiries to that call center, have been diverted to the mobile channel. They've been diverted to the automated phone, the IVR system. They've been diverted to their website. But the 30% that are coming in, well, they're just really hard. They're complicated. So the result is they haven't been able to reduce staff. They really are having to look to new types of technology and tools to really support this more complicated environment for those smaller yet more difficult exceptions that are occurring. So the challenge for companies and the opportunity for companies for differentiation are really at the top of this pyramid. How do I handle that exception coming in? How do I understand the context of the customer in a new way? How do I have all the information about that customer at the beginning of the interaction? And that's really where the world is going. The future is about handling exceptions. Now, this survey that we did, this research that we did, really looked at some of these shifts in process. How have they changed? And we found here that 75% of organizations report a shift in what we call the process boundary. So think of the old process boundary was, you had an interaction with a company, it was through the mail. The process really started when that package hit the back office. It hit the mailroom and then it went to the back office. Well, now, and what this research shows is that there's significantly more engagement from a website, from a tablet, from a smartphone. So the process boundary has moved away from the traditional walls of the company, the back office walls of the company, and they've moved to the customer. Again, age of the customer, it's moved outward to directly to interacting with the customer. So that's pretty significant. What we haven't done in business is really adjusted the way we build, design, and transform processes to affect this new process boundary. And that's what we're going to get into here in a moment. And a lot is around this major infrastructure change around mobility. And if you look at these statistics here, when I have my phone, I am confident I can accomplish what I need to no matter where I am. 68% of customers now believe that should be the case. And they're very frustrated when something they want to do is not available on their phone. So this is again further evidence of that, of that shift in process to starting with the customer, engaging the customer at really the new point of service, which is the mobile device. Now, as mentioned, the development approaches that have existed for years are not supporting this emerging process boundary, and our data really shows that. Many that were surveyed in this research, thought that the current development environment is good for that bottom of that pyramid, really for those highly structured processes, but they really don't meet the top end of that pyramid. They really don't support these more exception, more unstructured activities, that are now the norm. And that's really if you had to point to one finding in this research that is, pretty significant, is that top of the pyramid is not supported by the development approaches that really were built to support the bottom half of that pyramid. They were built to support a world of task-based production workers, where the goal of the software in those approaches was to keep those workers at high RPMs, to keep them heads down, to get the highest throughput of whatever production process they were doing. And now the focus has to be on how do I get the context of the customer to be able to support the more unstructured world that we're living in. So this is a very important finding, that 2/3 of organizations believe that their current development approaches do not support these emerging process boundaries. What are the biggest issues, the top barriers to the organization in achieving these new application development goals? Well, business requirements, that's always been an issue, right, between technology management and the business, trying to understand them, and that's still the case. Now, traditional approaches, as we'll talk about, that are more process-driven, more task-driven, more activity-focused, often would use as a method of communication process maps. They'd use structured systems analysis and design techniques, swim lanes, this type of way to communicate with business. And it's always been the case that when you go through that long analysis process, that by the time you're done in the traditional waterfall approach to development, that the requirements have changed. Well, that's more and more true with the sort of the rapidity with which process and business is changing today. We also find that in the number 2 selection here, that the technology management and the business are really not very well aligned. They're not working together as a unit. You have kind of the left brain and the right brain not being merged appropriately. So there's traditional communication problems that have really been exacerbated by this shift in process boundary and the move towards a more exception-based world that we live in. Now, 1/3 of organizations indicate the biggest challenge in taking this task-based approach is getting the right information to provide the appropriate context. So think of it this way. Most of most organizations have what we call a system of record, a structured system, a two-dimensional database, or a packaged application that is supposed to capture in a two-dimensional way the state of the customer. Well, what's happening is that you have lots of other information now that is almost as important. It's some would say more important, that comes from social media, that comes from email, that comes from activity streams, that it really required to give the real context of the customer, particularly as customers try to cross channels. A real problem for companies is how to provide what we call channel integration, to provide that complete customer journey across channels. You can't do that with a two-dimensional approach, a traditional database or packaged application capturing a record, right? So the biggest challenge, not surprisingly, as we've shown here, is that 1/3 of organizations believe that looking at the traditional task-based approaches to process mapping is not a good way to communicate the right information to the business in terms of what state it should be in terms of providing the appropriate context. So significant challenges with the traditional way of doing really task-based approaches, which as mentioned, really were the appropriate approach for the more production and automation focus for the previous generation of processes. What we have today is a different type of worker and a different type of process. Now, when you look at business process management, and we're going to talk about the software stacks here in a minute, so we'll differentiate business process management suites with dynamic case management, which is really comes out of the BPM world, but is specifically geared towards providing adaptability and providing a person, a information worker, to have more control over the process, to be able to deal with the unstructured and less predictable aspects of dealing with the emergent customer in the age of the customer. So we wanted to understand whether the current business process management suites, which are associated with the task and process-based aspects of design, are they cutting it in today's world? And 47% in this study basically said no, that they're good for the highly automated and structured processes, again from the beginning part of my initial chart, but they really fall short for the more human-driven processes, and that was pretty dominant. Many thought, about a quarter thought, that case management was separate and different from the BPM processes and technologies of the past. So this gives a little bit of context around that. This is my history of this whole area, going back to the mid-'80s and early '90s, where you really, workflow was first introduced. And what workflow meant was really replacing paper-based factories. So you had the idea of scanning and imaging paper coming in. It would go through a document review process. You'd do some data entry. You would archive the electronic file. And this was, of course, a huge productivity gain to really get paper out of these more high-volume, paper-oriented processes. Now, what happened is that people found that workflow was great at the departmental level, but really to transform a process, it often crosses different departments and functions. So we needed better integration capability. So you start to see in this chart, in the introduction of integration, enterprise application integration, and SOA, to really think of doing cross-departmental integration. And it's really that addition of that business process integration that created the new term business process management. So you had workflow, it morphed into business process management with better integration capabilities. Then around 2010, we started to see the emergence of this different type of worker and these less structured patterns, and we started to talk about adaptive case management or dynamic case management. In other words, a branch of BPM that would really address these less structured activities. And there was great improvements in terms of Enterprise social, being able to add a much better collaboration layer on top of a business process. So think of in circa 2005, to get sort of knowledge dissemination and collaboration, you might have had to put it in a Lotus Notes system. It would have cost you millions of dollars to do that, or build an intranet site. Again, millions of dollars. Now I talked to a company the other day, a big CPG company that had 200,000 employees on Chatter. So the incremental cost of adding collaboration on top of a business process really started to get low, and that's why we in 2011, 2012 started talking about the integration of collaboration and knowledge management into the business process. And the ultimate vision of where business process management and case management will go is to get more domain specific, which is what we call smart process apps. So you're applying that technology with a solution framework or with a very specific set of domain knowledge, not building the point solutions of old, but really building just more focused and more absorbable solutions for business. So that's kind of the kind of history of where we've been and kind of where we're going. Now, if you look at the how this new combination and evolution of these technologies and thinking really end up from an implementation standpoint, what it ends up being that there's a greater emphasis on providing information in context. So if you think of traditional process mapping and task-oriented approach, it was really about the task. You went from this task to this task to this task to this task, and yeah, you had information that was important, but the focus was really on the tasks. In this new world, the focus is on modeling the information. So you have unstructured information coming from the social world, coming from analytics. You have structured information that's available and needed at certain times at different states in the transition of the process. So let's design from that perspective first. Let's let information drive the design approach and have tasks and activities be subservient to the information that's needed at a particular point in time, because it's really all about information today. It's all about analytics today. Now, interestingly, nearly half the organizations we surveyed think that this data-first approach is really worth pursuing, and that it will provide a much richer experience and much more personalized interactions. Again, all targeting that more an empowered customer in the age of the customer. And the key thing, the number 1 and 2 there, surfacing the information at the right time, and more open and collaborative discussions, with the business. So if you can talk to a business and not show them a swim lane or a process map, you can talk to them about information. Even abstract aspects of information like data associations and data models, they can understand that better. And that's really the key. How do you get and drive better communication with the business to really redesign the process? So for future more dynamic process improvement, we asked them to select the most important capabilities. So you see that intelligent work routing is still important. So the basics of BPM, which is around routing of work, still is very, very, very important. But goals and goal management is statistically the same as 46% there being roughly the equivalent to 49%. So what this means is that as opposed to driving in a linear fashion based on tasks, let's have a more loosely defined construct as a goal. And the goal, can be subservient to the tasks, or be in charge really of the tasks, so that the tasks and the information will reconfigure based on attainment of the goal. And goals can be divided into sub-goals and contingencies and so forth. But it's moving, again, away from this linearly focused process approach to one that talks about information and goal achievement. So you think of a case. A case can stay in a process for months and months and months. It can be suspended. It can come back into the process. It can go out of the process. It's still driven by goals. It's a very different kind of way of thinking about process redesign as opposed to tasks. So when we look to the future, we think the processes will be driven by new information sources. So the sources here on the left are really social media. Again, I talked about that three-dimensional view of a state. It's not just about what's in that structured field in that database. It's about what's unstructured information also applies to the state, and that'll come from the Internet of Things, where sensors, almost everything will have a way to communicate its presence, whether GPS or various other intelligence coming from the physical world, as well as social media. And the ability to integrate with core systems, the lower left there on the left-hand side, is also very, very important. A lot of mobile apps today really don't cut it. They're about 500 million in various app stores available, but many of them don't connect well enough with the underlying core system. So core systems still, you have to reach back into your organization to provide a true customer experience. So that's where business process management, dynamic case management, come in. They're going to manage the tasks and milestones. They're going to manage the goals, but they're also going to be able to help integrate in with those core systems. So we're looking for smart applications driven by analytics, driven by social. We're looking at good integration with core systems, and the goal is to provide that information worker with sort of this virtual intelligence that comes from understanding a lot about the customer. Banks are doing the advanced banks are really looking at creating these sort of virtual branches now that have instant and immediate access to the tellers and to the vice presidents that might be in a branch, and using analytics and social to kind of give that level of personalization that you had in a bank in the 1930s, where you walked in, they knew your family, they knew your business, and you can do that at scale by leveraging the analytics, big data, and the social world. So that's kind of where applications are really moving, in the future, to provide that information-rich context. And that's why information-led design is really the way to go, as this outside of the firewall information becomes even more valuable in many, many applications. Now, this is a somewhat complicated slide, but just to make that distinction between traditional BPM and process mapping and this new world of dynamic case management and information-led design, the goal is to really provide to make the person front and center, information worker front and center, not to keep them at high RPMs and keep them under control, but to give them some adaptive capability. So what does that mean? Well, what it means is the inner and outer circles here, and the inner circles are really what adaptive capabilities are in today's case management solution. So the ability to create a case, to search case artifacts, to create tasks, to select predefined steps from a library. Those are adaptive features that are available today in most products. What the providers are building and what the market's asking for are the ones in the outer loop here, which are really to leverage social and activity streams to get expertise location, to use goals as the way I talked about, to take frequently created tasks and searches and so forth, and to understand those patterns, have analytics understand those patterns, and to institutionalize them so that you're constantly improving the process, without a designer having to do it, but the system itself will get more intelligent and institutionalize repeated behavior in a very positive way, using predictive analytics and models for next best action. So next best action should not just be in a call center when they're trying to sell you more service based on your profile. It really should be what is the next action that we should do in a process to really improve the customer experience. And that's really where this whole area is going, using analytics to improve the customer experience. So hopefully that's helpful. The key is with these new solutions, these new case management platforms, is to look in your organization for repeating patterns that might go across a number of lines of business, across a number of use cases, so that you're bringing in some technology that you can leverage across a number of repeating case patterns. And this one, if you look at, very simply setting up, doing a medical assessment, doing the testing, firing off web services calls to order tests for all these different areas, assessing the tests using dashboards and analytics. That's a very similar pattern for a lot of what's done on the provider side in healthcare. So the idea is you bring in a care coordination or care management solution based on dynamic case management, and you look to design processes that'll get you 80% there with that existing technology, and you'll have to do some configuration and testing and so forth. So that's kind of the idea. Look for an enterprise-based case management solution. So with that, I wanted to make one additional emphasis on the importance of metrics. And this is, of course, it's baseball season, and the Red Sox are really reverting to their 2012 approach of losing a lot of baseball games. But the parallel I make here is between how baseball statistics were grossly misunderstood for 100 years. In that, and this came out in the movie Moneyball that many of you may have seen, or the great book by Michael Lewis by the same name, that really talked about the focus had been just on batting average, and this very unusual gentleman named Bill James, in his publications on baseball statistics, found that what wins games is really total bases, which is not just batting average, which just looks at hits, but it's also the walks. So it's actually the total bases divided by the at-bat. So that's where statistics like on-base percentage started to get very often used as metrics. So it's very easy to have a complete misunderstanding of the most important metrics that will drive a business process. And that's my argument is that that's been very true in business. If you look at our view of the current BPM metrics that are valued in organizations, they're really at the lower part of this configuration here. We focus on quality, data quality, error quality, things like that come out of manufacturing. Great, still need to do that. We focus on productivity. How do you reduce the cycle time in a process? And that's very, very important. Obviously, if you're trying to set up a new account, doing that in 6 days versus 9 days is better. And those are important metric categories, but they've been the only ones that have really been the focus. What we're suggesting is that there's a money ball going on here where businesses have to start to really look at metrics that are broader than that around customer experience, things like Net Promoter Score and voice of the customer, and business agility, being able to quickly change that product. There's such a rapid rate of change. Product life cycles are just declining in time. Businesses are getting wiped off the Fortune 500 list every year and getting surpassed by other companies because of this rate of change that's really occurring. So we're going to start to need to measure the ability of an organization and their processes to respond to change, compliance change, and particularly market changes. Market changes, new disruptive technologies coming in based on new digital approaches are really going to affect business in a very short term, very dramatically. So we're expanding the notion of metrics to 4 buckets instead of the 2 that have been the focus of business process management. And all of this we're talking about, this information-led design, all allows you to have that broader view because you're not just focused on the task completion, which drives you to productivity, in that productivity bucket, or you're not just looking at the number of keystrokes and the number of errors that might be occurring. You're now able to look at by focusing on the information, you're able to look at things like what's the end-to-end customer experience being provided by these concatenation of process areas. So that's an important area of research for Forrester. And today, very few organizations have ways to use customer experience metrics for process improvement or believe that agility can be measured, but we think that's going to be changing very rapidly. So finally, let me just make a couple quick recommendations. Look at this data-first approach that services information at the right time. That's the key to the age of the customer. Look at adaptive solutions. So don't just think about automating processes to reduce FTEs or labor in the process. Look at empowering your people to do that job. Think of your margins are going to be in the memories that you create for your customers, To do that, you need intelligent people in your organization that have the right information at the right time. Put the task mapping tool away and think about new ways to engage the business that are based on information. And focus on goals. Focus on goals rather than tasks. The goal is to provide a great level of customer experience, to do it at a at a strong completion time. Look for the end-to-end or the kind of value stream approach. What are the goals associated with that entire customer experience? So with that, I will leave you. And I thank you for your attention. Have a great day.